Hello, I'm Eduardo, and welcome to Beyond Data, the podcast that explores how data and AI is transforming businesses and the people they serve. Each week, I interview a CEO or a chief digital officer and dive into their personal journey into data and AI and the products they have created. Our goal is to share real business use cases of data and AI and the leaders behind them. Today, we have Christopher Paquette. Chris, welcome. Uh, Christopher is the Chief Transformation Officer at Personify Health, where he leads digital strategy, AI integration, and operational innovation in personalized health and benefit solutions. He has an MBA and an undergrad from Northwestern University in economics and psychology, and also an MBA. He was partner at McKinsey and Company, where he was 12 years leading both advising across industries and created several initiatives, including a digital academy, which helped companies build the capabilities to become digital ready. I do want to talk a little bit more about that later on. And before joining Personify, Christopher served as the Chief Digital Transformation Officer at Allstate, and also in several different companies such as Merck and also Accenture. He's a recognized thought leader and frequent speaker at industry conferences. He has a passion for leveraging technology to improve customer experiences, businesses, and ultimately people's lives. Christopher, welcome to Beyond Data.
Yeah, thanks, Eduardo. You make me sound pretty cool, maybe cooler than I am, but happy to be here and happy to have a good chat with you.
You know, we usually do research on our guests so that we prepare for this session. And I was just telling you, in the lobby that it's really hard for me to pick what I want to talk to you about because you've done so many things. But I do want to start off how we usually start off this podcast, which is why you chose the undergrad or the studies that you chose, right? So you did economics and psychology at Northwestern University, right? Why those two, and what drove you to choose that career or that undergraduate study?
Yeah, and so interestingly, originally I was going to be a doctor. Obviously, that didn't work out well for me. And the reason was because I've always loved math. I've always loved science and sort of the reasons behind things. And that's probably a theme I'll come back to a few times over the course of our conversation. And so I said, well, doctor is kind of a known career and I like math and science and feels like a STEM kind of a field. So let's go begin to study pre-med at Northwestern. They didn't have a pre-med major. And so I picked psychology as something that's sort of like interesting and, and generally in kind of the sciences area. But after my first year, I realized, it didn't appeal to me. And so I wanted to do something a little bit more businessy. And so I said, well, in addition to psychology, which is maybe a little bit of a softer science, I want something a little bit harder. And so I considered being a math major in addition to being a psychology major, but ended up being an econ major instead. And so double degrees in psych and econ, and said well, let's go do some businessy stuff. And that's kind of as far as I made it in school, to be honest. And so that's how I landed there. So general interest in math and data and the reasons behind things.
And what was the driver behind, liking math and data? When did that start? Was it at a younger age or was it during your undergraduate degree?
Yeah, I think it was from a young age. And this is, one where you'd ask my parents and they'd probably say yeah, you were always kind of that pain in the, what kid that was doing calculations and asking why 17 times and just always searching for the reason behind the reason. And, just an inquisitive kid. I was always pretty good at math. It always just kind of clicked. And I think it meshes with my love of music. I think from a young age, I played a bunch of different instruments. And so this idea of math in the world and how it shapes who we are and what happens, in front of the scenes as well as behind the scenes, was just always kind of fun for me to explore.
And after you graduated, and one of the first jobs that you took was working at Accenture, right? So how did that happen? How did you connect between, economics and psychology? And I'll go back to psychology because it's a trend that we see with our guests, and we usually interview chief data officers, CEOs, and there's this really multidisciplinary approach to their data practice, and they usually have it's not just psychology; it's more of a organizational approach to data, right? And many of them have either masters in organizational design, or they have masters in change management, or and I'll go right to the question. So how have you seen that psychology has impacted the way that you do business through data and AI?
Yeah. So a few parts to the answer. So the first question you asked, like, how, like, what did I do directly after and why, and how did it all kind of lead together? So I went to Accenture, and the initial kind of scope of my role at Accenture as an analyst there, starting analyst, was in the change management practice for clients that were going through big financial system implementations. And so it was like the technology side, but really the people aspect of that. And so my psychology degree was relevant, and, you know, Accenture, kind of big, well-known firm. And I was like, might as well start somewhere. And so I went there for a few years. The psychology aspect of it was obviously really important for change management and training and human performance and development. And I began to parlay that into, like, okay, how do you do broader change and lift the performance of, like, large groups of people at the same time? And so therefore, one of the things that I did was began to teach myself how to do web coding and development for WBT or CBT, like web or computer-based training. And so it was just kind of like a weekend thing. I was like, yeah, I could, like, buy a book on JavaScript and write some web pages and, you know, roll out these training materials for, like, there's a new system, how do you use it, to, you know, for hundreds and thousands of people. And so it was like a natural evolution from, you know, psychology to thinking, how do people learn and how do they behave, and, like, what's their incentive to use the system, and even some early gamification of, like, well, there was a couple of like programs and trainings that I designed for how do you collect, like, points as you go through and make it interesting, and, like, what's the checkboard of, like, yes, I'm done with all these things, and, you know, as you design these little, like, apps or web-based training. So I think using from the very beginning that the mindset of, like, how do people work, behavioral economics, psychology, how are they thinking, how are they incented, was always important. And, you know, like, now fast forward, you know, 20, 30 years, like, it's only more important now. And, you know, as in this world where everyone's caught up with, like, data science and they got to learn Python, like, sure, all that's critical, but, like, so much more, we see, like, well, actually AI is going to do a lot of that for us very quickly, but AI for some time is still not going to be able to help us think how do people think in behavioral economics. And so it's like, as you said, Eduardo, like, that's going to be evergreen, thinking how people think.
And I want to go back to another guest that we did interview with. He was the chief human resources officer for a very big steels company in Latin America. So talking about Rodrigo Piña, he's a human resources officer, and he has a background in engineering. And I see him lead both data and technical conversations with ease. Like, he'll go into a conversation and in a roundtable with his data and AI team, and he'll go into details on the products, the impact, the business outcomes. What's your perspective on this? Do you think leaders, and not just from data, from other functions, should they be going deep or learning technical capabilities so they can perform in their data initiatives?
So I think the answer is yes, but I think you have to qualify or even quantify, if you can, what deep means. I think there's a few levels of deep, and I wouldn't call myself, like, a super deep technologist. You know, certainly been around systems and technology and data and architecture and, like, my entire career, but I wouldn't say, like, I'm a world-class technologist by any means. And so does that mean I'm deep? I don't know. I'd say no. Maybe compared to others, I am. And so I think the level of deep that you have to be at my level with what I want to be doing is to be able to ask the right questions and to be able to pressure test the answers that you're getting. And so a lot of the leading that I try to do with teams now and throughout my career has been very Socratic in its approach. So lead with questions. And if you can ask the right 6 or 8 questions and get good answers to all of them, you're probably okay. But if 2 or 3 of the answers are weak and they're not, you know, certain, then you ask the additional 4 or 5 follow-up questions on those. And they have to be the right questions. They can't be like, well, like, Are you going to have high quality data? Because that's a dumb question, because you're going to get the answer yes, and you probably won't understand the answer.
Exactly.
So it's that question of like, how deep do you have to go to understand the technical capabilities and whether they're up to snuff?
So you did change management at Accenture, and then you went as director of client services at Marsh. How was that change from, serving client and actually being in a company and leading initiatives?
Yeah, it was terrific. It was a big step up in responsibility. I was leading larger teams and leading implementations of client platforms that were, millions, if not tens of millions of dollars of revenue for Marsh. And maybe just a quick step back. So the actual job at Marsh was implementing risk management systems that clients were using to manage their total cost of claims, whether it was commercial P&C or D&O or other types of insurance, as well as claim systems and medical bill review systems. And so my job was kind of more like a technical implementation manager, and I would lead teams of folks that would put these systems in place for our clients. And so I think it was, it took me from more of like I'm focused on an individual and leveraging technology to do that, to, the level up. I'm focused on a client and what they need to deliver, and more the strategy and like, how is our system going to help them deliver better financials, not just like an individual performance. And so that was a great step up. The ability to lead teams was a great step up. The ability to get more technically proficient at implementing a system, understanding the database technologies, that existed now 30 years ago behind it, was a big step up. And it was all, just a great growth opportunity. It was also in a rapidly growing part of Marsh. It was a small company that started with, I'm going to make up these numbers, is probably, 20, 30, 40 million in revenue a year. And we grew that to like almost 10x over the course that was over 5 or 6 years through acquisition and new clients. And so like lots of growth, helping to have input into the product roadmap. And so, it was just a great learning opportunity across all those fronts.
So there's this shift of going from serving as a consultant, going actually leading the business. Was there any insight or something that you didn't expect to find out by working directly in the business, specifically in insurance, that you didn't know before that surprised you?
Yeah, I think probably two things. One was from the insurance business perspective, just the dollars at risk, the dollars in play, specifically from insurance, but also kind of broadly in financial services. Hundreds of millions, billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars that are changing hand, and now we're into like the trillions and tens of trillions as you talk about, income statements and valuations for some of these companies. And it's just like that scale was eye-opening for me, coming from a place where like, well, we're going to do a system implementation at Accenture for some client, to like looking at the total cost of risk for a major multinational corporation. You're like, so that was really eye-opening. And the second was, that was a little bit more industry focused. The second that was more functionally focused, the first thing that popped to mind was, as you're working in a scrappy and rapidly growing business, how important it is to work collaboratively. It was like, agile wasn't even really a word yet. This was, again, probably 25 years ago now. But that's how we were working. And so the product team and the engineering team would sit close together. We would meet daily with the account implementation team and the account management. And like things like, hey, this is a cool feature that we're doing for this client over here. Shouldn't we make that a core part of our product? Yes, we can. How long would that take? What are the requirements? Well, let's just build it and then we'll test it. We're doing all that kind of stuff. And so it just kind of opened my eyes to like, wow, this is a really cool way to do it versus the waterfall system implementations that I was doing at Accenture. And so that rapid growth, highly agile, product-oriented environment was just a great training ground for me.
But it's interesting that you say this, and it's surprising that this sort of building things and shipping within such a traditional industry such as insurance was already in place. And this was what, in between 2005, 2008?
Yeah, it was something in there. And yeah, it was like, that's how we were doing it. It was like a small product that we were growing, risk management information system. And, it's examples back then were like, we had a feature called report bursting. I don't know why I remember this with such great detail now, but report bursting. And the basic idea was like, Well, if you're a major if you're a major multinational corporation and you have 27 country managers out there, and you want each of them to get the same report, but limited to their area with just their cost of risk, and rather than having to run 27 reports or whatever, you could set it up and say, limit on blah, 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 where select from who for this table, where, and then send to this person, and then like burst it out, and you hit go once and it bursts out. So 20, 25 years ago, that was pretty cool stuff. Not so much anymore, but it was like, well, yeah, every client's going to want that, to run the same report, but have different data populated for different people with the push of one button. And so we took that and we put it into the core product.
That's a data product, right? And the first version of deep research, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Why do you think that in an industry that's so traditional, what made it possible for Mars to create a culture of innovation or shipping, which is completely unheard of in a traditional industry like insurance?
Yeah, it's I think part of it was the structure of this company. So again, it was kind of a small software startup inside this huge insurance brokerage firm, and it ran like a small startup. And so there was like a CEO and a CFO and like a corporate business structure, and that reported up through some other part of the organization. But we really didn't do much with them. It was sort of like we were building this product and service offering, and brokers knew what we did, and they would take our products to their client and kind of like resell us. But for the most part, we were ring fenced off to the side. And I think there's still a lot of applicability today for that sort of like growing the skunk works as kind of a side project and insulating it from the rest of the business, but then eventually incorporating and integrating over time. And we were kind of like in the midst of that. Like, it wasn't entirely separate, because again, like some of the brokers would sell our services, and we had some interaction with the broader account teams for our big clients, but it also wasn't just totally integrated into the business. And I think that allowed like a nice balance of innovation, but also benefiting from being part of the larger, huge Marsh corporate mothership.
That's so interesting. I do want to maybe connect the point, like at what point did you decide that you want to do an MBA, right? Because you do come from a background, economics, psychology, you've done some business work at Accenture. When did you decide to go back to Northwestern?
Yeah, it was, I actually decided pretty quickly after I moved to Marsh that I wanted to get an MBA as well. And so I actually did it part-time. So I worked at Marsh for, the 5 or 6 years, and for 3 or 4 of that towards the end, I was doing my MBA part-time. And the reason was, at Accenture, as I was getting more into like, well, I want to go code JavaScript and, teach like how to build these things, I was like, that's great. But also, I actually want some of the things that I touched on at the beginning about Marsh. Like, I want to be able to elevate and think about like the overall company financials. I want to think about a big, broad industry that was dealing in the terms of, hundreds of billions of dollars, and operate on that scale. And I don't want to be, super deep technically. I'd rather be sort of deep technically, but more broad from a strategic and management standpoint. And I just felt like business school at Kellogg would round out a lot of those capabilities. And so I said, well, I'm going to have my cake and eat it too. I'm going to keep working on the deep tech stuff and being a technical account manager, but also I'm going to go get a world-class MBA.
And how, this is an interesting question that I do usually ask my guests, is how did the university and network or ecosystem help you kind of like think outside the box and maybe connect the points in building and deploying new initiatives at your company?
Yeah, so Northwestern, and I'm, full transparency, I'm a member, trustee in the alumni board, the Northwestern Alumni Association. So I have like deep affiliation. I'm a 2-time Wildcat. So is my wife. So I kind of bleed purple. Great school, go Cats. But one of the things that Northwestern is actually specifically known for is like being pretty great at everything. And what is everything? Like, we have a terrific engineering school. There's an amazing liberal arts program. Our music school is world-class. Like, athletics are pretty good. And like everything is just, everything is good. And so maybe 5 or 7 years ago, I know there was a specific push to say like, what would make all the great things that are already good even better? well, it's like if we can cross integrate. And so there's a huge push now over the last 3 or 4 years in particular to say, how do we take AI that's being driven by the McCormick School of Engineering and leverage that everywhere else? So like AI from engineering plus Kellogg, AI plus the School of Music, AI plus the School of Psychology, AI plus, and just like leverage that cross-disciplinary aspect. And so I got excited about that. So I kind of forgot what the original question was, but like that influenced a lot of just how I've thought about myself in my career and combining, when I was at Kellogg, now 20 years ago, even there was that flavor and aspect. So I had concentrations in marketing, but also in analytical consulting, also in management and technology. And so I was like picking and pulling from different disciplines and going out of my way to meet those professors and say, well, how would you combine this with this? And how do you think about this? And like, what's the bigger picture? And it's just a school broadly, a university broadly that's known for doing that. And so it was a lot of fun to be able to, go and kind of pick and pull my own classes and create my path.
No, and it goes back to the point that we mentioned about the importance of having an interdisciplinary background. But part of having that interdisciplinary background is really having access to a very diverse ecosystem or network, right? Because when you think about it, it's not just about you learning those skills, but having access to those experts that can help you navigate a world-class data AI initiative, right? I mean, you talk about Marsh in your the product that you launched. I mean, it's not just about having technical people, it's having people that know the business that can help us understand the subject matter expertise on the elements, understanding the risks. So it's really, we've seen this pattern where really successful digital data leaders understand this, and they're constantly building their network. They're constantly leveraging not just a university, but leveraging startups, leveraging experts. And I also want to talk about the next step in your career, because there's something that is very particular to this organization, which is McKinsey, right? I've worked with many McKinsey leaders before, or ex-McKinseys. And one thing that it's very particular to them is that they have a very tight-knit and global network between them, even if you're working at McKinsey or if you're working after McKinsey. So let's go into this. So how did you meet McKinsey, and why did you choose to work with them?
Yeah. So I don't know when I first heard of McKinsey, but it was, early in my career, probably somewhere in school, in undergrad, where I was like, this kind of elite group of super smart people. And I was like, well, that's appealing. I don't know, someday maybe that would be a fun thing to do. And it began to be more and more of a, highlighted towards the end of my part-time program at school, where I began to see classmates that were full-time go to McKinsey or BCG or other management consulting firms. And the way I began to think about next steps after Marsh was, well, I want to do one of two things. I love the idea of, by that point, I had kind of already written the headline for my career, which was leveraging technology, digital data for driving transformation in tech-enabled services businesses. So those three things there, and like the digital data technology, teach myself to code JavaScript on the weekend. Like, it just ignited this love for like, man, this thing is powerful. You can do so much with it. Love transformation, love asking the questions, as we've already talked about. And then the tech-enabled services business thing is, kind of code for insurance, healthcare, and or banking. And that's where I spent all my career, in one of those three things. And it's just, they're big, like generally they're kind of broken, and they're still broken, and there's like lots to go and fix and do in these areas. And so it's just been an appealing part of my career. And so the transition to McKinsey afforded me the opportunity to continue those kind of things. And so I said, like, well, either it's, McKinsey or BCG or Bain or one of those top tier consulting firms, or I want to go work for the CIO or CTO of some, $500 million to $1 billion company, and like really drive transformation with technology. So I ended up choosing this one, and it worked out great. McKinsey was the one that had really first launched a formal practice around technology consulting. Back then it was called the Business Technology Office, or the BTO. Since then it became digital McKinsey, then was McKinsey Digital, then it was like analytics, and they've changed the name, a bunch of times since then. But the kernel for that started very, very early. And so it was really, really appealing as the next step in my career to continue, again, have my cake and eat it too, to focus on technology, but also to be applying that to broader business problems at the top level with, many, many zeros of impact at stake.
And you talked about, so you mentioned three things. So it's leveraging technology to transform businesses in tech-enabled services or industries. And I want to talk about one of the flagship initiatives that you led in McKinsey, which was the Digital Academy, which is really interesting because you look at your journey, your professional journey, and it does have a lot of technical, analytical elements to it. But really, what I see is more of a focus on transformation or changing how organizations work. So what was the logic behind a consulting company's launching a learning capabilities? And just for those that don't know the initiative, Digital Academy was an initiative that was launched in 2014.
Yep.
And it focused on helping companies back where digital transformation wasn't even a term, helping them build the digital capabilities, building agile and executive leadership. And it was basically competing with many of the e-learning companies out there that were attacking executive education. So what was the logic behind this, behind a consulting company launching this?
Yeah. So I talk about my McKinsey journey, my 12 years there, in sort of three broad phases. And the first two are important to get to the third one, which I will end up at very, very quickly. The first, which was probably 2, 3, 4 years, was more industry focused. It was more about being deep in banking and insurance. And so I did a lot of work, much of it technology related, some of it not. And so I did sales and marketing, I did some strategy work, and that really allowed me to get deep in those industries. The next phase, call it 3 or 4 years, was I found that I really enjoyed the functional angle of going deeper on transformation and kind of transformation broadly. And I began to pivot and do that more across different sectors. And so I did some work in travel and logistics. I did some work in automotive. I did some work in healthcare provider. I did some work in retail. I did some work in wholesale. I did, you get the idea. But it was all sort of like transformation. And some was more digital transformation, some was data and analytics transformation, some was more org and operating model transformation, but it was all like, we're going to change a big part of your company for you with the ultimate, aim of obviously, bottom line impact sustainably. And then came the third phase, which was more like the going deep on this idea of Digital Academy and capability building, while still maintaining a lot of the other client work as well. But that idea came out of phase 2, which was the transformation work and having hundreds or thousands of people ultimately affected, and you saying like, oh, well, here's like a big change that you guys can make. And they're, the client's sitting there going like, look at me like the typical consultant stuff, like, well, easy for you to write on a page, but like getting, 3,000 people to behave differently. Do you know how hard that is? I was like, well, yes, I've spent time in industry as well. But, more importantly, maybe we can help you with that. And what would those assets and what would that product look like? And so that was the genesis of building this offering. And there was really 2 places where we had the most success. One was in the idea of how do you build better product owners and product management, which was, again, kind of a new way of thinking about the world back then, now 10 years ago for a lot of the bigger companies. And this idea of like, what does a great product owner look like? What are the capabilities? What are the skills? What's the mindset? If you had this decision to make, who do you get input from? All those types of questions was just a really important skill set that was missing. And so we doubled down and said, let's develop some, the learning track, the assets, and how to, in the period of 8 weeks, how do you build a new crop of great product owners? That was one. The second was around sort of the leadership and management levels at the top level for data and analytics. And so this was more about unlocking and unleashing creativity for what you can be using your data for within the organization. And so there was a little bit of technical training of like, well, you should, understand basic database, background and constructs, and like, what does coding mean, and how do you create, statistically significant models, and like there's a little bit of that kind of stuff, but really it was more like, okay, now how do you think through the art of the possible, and like what is the potential that you can unlock with data? And so there's a bunch of tracks around that. We would take clients through those two programs. So those are kind of the two areas that we had the most success. We did some partnerships with other more technical skill building and areas along the way as well. But like those are the two premier offerings, and they all grew out of this need of like, hey, we have hundreds and thousands of people that we need to get working differently. How do you be the spear at the tip of the spear for that change?
So how do you mobilize what we set here as a data initiative or a digital initiative? What do you think was the biggest hurdle that your clients had to go through and that you helped enable with the Digital Academy?
Yeah, I think it was, like enabling a new operating model. And what do I mean by that? I mean, like, many companies even still today do the like, okay, well, let's like in June begin planning for, the next year's initiatives and try to write down, do the budgeting, what's the strategic plan, and then like you finalize it and then you put it in a folder and never look at it again. And you know how it goes. A lot of companies still do it that way. And like, it's just not how you want to do it. You want to do it like, agile every month or two, like take a step back. What are the metrics? What are the most important things? Let's reshift priorities. Let's reallocate capital. But like all of that is hard to do at the top level without the bottom up input or the support of like, what's the art of the possible from the middle layers of management. And so changing that operating model, and all that is done on the back of like empowered teams with great product owners that are actually thinking through what are the market needs and what are our clients saying and the stakeholders saying and what's going to create value. And that middle layer of management that's saying like, here's the art of the possible. And again, back to my Socratic method of like, I might not know all the answers, but I'm going to ask all the right questions and like engender that creativity and more of like an agile operating model within the organization. Making that pivot was one of the more important things that we saw clients do.
And you left McKinsey in 2020 to go into Trustmark, right, as the Chief Digital and Strategy Officer. And then after that, you went as the Chief Digital Transformation Officer for Allstate. So a mix between health and insurance, which kind of like goes back to your mission of enabling tech-enabled services, right? I do want to make the question is, right up until that point, when did you become so interested in health? Like it seems like there is this element in your career where you've been exposed to it at Accenture, at McKinsey, obviously, and then what point did you say this is really where I want to work at?
Yeah, I think it was maybe three things coming together. So one was back to like way back at the beginning of our chat of like, I wanted to be a doctor. I found it like, intellectually interesting and like, of course, culturally important and socially important. This idea of like delivering great medicine, it's hard to argue that that's not important for our society. So like that was one part that was still an interest. Two is I married this like super rad ER doctor named Kate, who's now my wife. She's still a super rad ER doctor, and like I'm just constantly in awe of how awesome she is and the impact that she creates. But I know that her life is pretty hard too sometimes because of the healthcare system and like insurance and providers and the back and forth and how the whole thing works. And so just like there's problems there to fix, and that's like really appealing to me. I want to go, fix the problems. And then maybe the third part is just, the opportunity. It's fun again to play with businesses that have like tons and tons of zeros, but to be able to do that, plus also know like that person like Steve or Sally, they had a better healthcare experience because of something that I did. That's also really satisfying. So combining those two things was maybe the third.
So I do want to talk about personify health because you mentioned this about impacting lives through technology and health. So it's very much a platform that simplifies both access and management of health benefits to a variety of stakeholders. You come in once the company is already at scale, right? So how did it first? I'd love to hear from your perspective what really is Personifies Health approach to or advantage in the market, and then talk a little bit about data or AI products you've enabled or launched within Personify Health.
Yeah. So let me first start with 30 seconds to personify. So the overall mission, I won't get this exactly right word for word, but it's to help employees live healthier lives at optimal costs. And so it's like optimal, healthier lives is definitely first. And then, if we can do something about the cost side, that's there too. And we do that through three main service offerings. One is TPA services, where we're helping employers manage the cost of healthcare and do the claim payment and enrollment and eligibility and provider and all that kind of stuff. Two is helping their employees navigate the healthcare system through advocacy and navigation services. So like, man, I don't know what doctor to go see next, or can you help me? Or like, I just got diagnosed with being, pre-diabetic. Like, what course of care should I go after? So that's the second one. And then the third one is a wellness platform that's like for everybody, including the long tail of people who are actually still pretty healthy. How do you stay healthy? How do you move more? How do you eat healthier? What's your daily reminders to like take a break, to be mindful, those kind of things. And so the market thesis, and we're owned by a PE company that bought some assets and put them all together, is that those three things combined are really powerful. And like that resonates. That's really cool. Because if you have like a digital platform and the personalized care, and you're managing the healthcare costs and helping people get in to see doctors, like all that comes together really powerfully. And so the name of the game for us is to continue to deliver on those three things, to integrate them more, and to leverage, like you started to go, Eduardo, the data and the analytics that we have in order to intervene and help guide and steer people to healthier options. And so one of the cooler things that I get to do is work directly with a reporting and analytics team and say, like, let's, look retroactively and help clients understand, here were all of the people who were pre-diabetic that we got into a program and now are like actually quite healthy. And like, what's the health difference and what's the cost difference? Who are all the people that, would have gone to go see an ER and sat there for 12 hours waiting to be seen when they could have gone to urgent care instead and taken care of their problem much more quickly at a cheaper cost? Like, what are all those types of interventions, and what are we doing, and how are we helping to create healthier lives at optimal costs? And so, that's retroactive, but then you take that and you say like, okay, well, what can we learn about like all the times we got it right? And sometimes we don't get it right, but next time let's get it right. And so how do you learn and change those algorithms to intervene and call and, intersect and to provide better care at the optimal time? And so it's really like, I wouldn't hold myself up as like a clinician or a doctor or any of that kind of stuff, but like helping, but there's a lot of folks that I have on my team and elsewhere in the organization. And so helping to enable all that and create a system in which they can leverage data to prove value and create more value in the future is like super rewarding for me.
Now, there's this concept, and you mentioned it, and I do want to pinpoint it. And we talked about it in our last guest, which was the concept of hard to get data, which is so important when you want to have an advantage in the market and building both AI or data products. What is a hard to get data that Personify Health has created, maybe the sourcing or the access to it, that helps you build a 10x better product in the market?
Yeah, I think it's, I think the ease with which people can do a few things. So like the connection of wearables data into the platform and making that part of your overall, as you think about like wellness, I think is really important. So that's one source. Connecting that, and sometimes like we do, you remember the three services, sometimes we'll do services 2 and 3, but not number 1. And so we don't have the claims data in our own environment, but we can pull that in and then combine that with the wearables data and the other health score data and intervention data that we have. And so a lot of it is about the data ecosystem to combine things that most people don't have the right, much less the platform to be able to combine well and extract insights from. So I think that's a big part of it. The other thing is that our the wellness platform, the thing number 3 that I mentioned, is just like a world-class engagement engine. And so like we've always been industry leading in terms of engagement and people checking in. There's a lot of it's like stuff that you already know, that we just do it consistently. We do it really well. So, fresh daily content, videos served up that are really personalized and interesting, rewards and gamifications presented in the right way, the right nudges and notifications, and like all those things, just go together to say like, well, we can get someone to engage with us. We can connect all the data internally and also externally. And then we have the power to extract the insights for what have we done for you and what should you do in the future. Like all that is just a really powerful market offering.
So going back also to change management, I mean, if you really want to lead a transformation in industry, you really got to connect with the user. There's a lot of talk about how AI is going to transform the health industry. And you're right now literally in the arena, working at a tech company, leading the transformation. Where do you think the industry is headed? Where's AI going to play a critical role in how we deliver health services in the US specifically?
Yeah, wow, that's a big question. How much time do we have? I don't know.
We'll do a 3-hour podcast.
Yeah. So I guess my quick answer is going to be, I think it's everywhere. One big area is kind of what I've just said, like the connection of data and who you are. And like, you extend that, 3 years from now, like what would be a cool thing that I'd love to be able to do for us? Like, well, continuous glucose monitoring plus all your wearables data ingested into the platform actually tells you specifically, here's what you should probably go eat today. And that's connected to, a meal delivery service that shows up with like exactly the macronutrients that you need, that, by the way, you've also rated in the past. And so we know that you're going to enjoy eating it. Like, will that actually happen 3 years from now? I don't know. But like on the wellness and prevention and healthy living side, like that's pretty cool. I'd sign up for that. And so it's going to be stuff like that of like inventive ways with new service delivery models, leveraging the data that we have. Given that you asked about healthcare broadly, like, you have to also acknowledge the power. And I know like, 1/10 of 100th of 1% of like what's actually happening, but like in the medical research and drug R&D space for like, the things that you read about in the weekend section of the New York Times, like protein folding and DNA synthesis and like finding the coding versus non-coding spots on the, again, like I know nothing about this kind of stuff, but like but what I have read is that AI is a super powerful way to accelerate all of those different types of research. And I'm convinced that in, the next 10 to 20 years are going to, bring some really, really amazing pharmacological interventions that will just like, we can't even envision today.
I think that was that was a very broad question, but you think you nailed it perfectly. Thank you, Christopher. I want to now go with one of the questions that we sourced from our community. And as I mentioned, this is a very broad community of either students, some chief digital officers, some CHROs. And I love these questions from one of the students here in Mexico. And they said, there's a lot of talk, I'm paraphrasing and translating as well. There's a lot of talk about how AI is going to replace people and roles, right? And there's this very hot conversation around, should students still learn to code or not? I think I know the answer already, but what is your perspective on how incoming talent in the market should be preparing both in skills and mindset, right? So that they can perform in the industry.
Yeah. So I think the answer is yes. You should still, we should still be learning how to write code. But I think again, it comes back to like the level of depth question that we asked before. And I think there are much more important things to know than just how to write Python. And so like I'll use, I have a daughter who's thinking through colleges and what she wants to study next. And she loves math and the background not dissimilar to mine. And I'm telling her like, yeah, go deep on the math, but like go like applied math. Like how do you solve problems with math and think about it? And like you should have a humanities aspect as well. And by the way, like, yeah, you better be taking some Python courses because like maybe we don't write in that 20 years from now, but it's going to be a foundation for what you do. So I think it's kind of that same answer of like, yes, it's important. It's not the most important thing, but like you can't know nothing about technology, but also AI is going to do a lot of that for us in the coming years.
And I go back to a phrase that we share a lot. It's not going to be that you're replaced by AI. You're going to be replaced by someone that knows how to manage or use AI for their job, right?
That's it. That's exactly it.
So, Christopher, going back to your life's mission, and I love that you have actually this very clear, transforming through technology organizations that are transforming lives. Very similar to, I mean, I don't want to say it, but very similar to Stanford's lemma, right? Yeah. But, kind of like summarizing your journey, it's an interdisciplinary approach to data, learning from how to mobilize organizations from change management, and understanding that going deep into the technical aspect of a data product, an AI product, is where the magic really happens, is that last mile of making it successful. So, Christopher, thank you so much for your time, for your generosity. Congratulations on everything you've done. We're going to be really excited to see what you do at Personify Health. And thank you so much again. Very happy to have you here.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a lot of fun, Eduardo. I've enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for letting me come and filling a really fun hour for me.
We're going to have to set up maybe 2 or 3 more sessions because I have like 1,000 more questions about your career, but we'll set them up later. Thank you so much.
That sounds great. Thank you.